They told you loyalty was one of the greatest virtues a human being could possess. They put it in religious texts. They carved it into military codes. They whispered it into the ears of children and called it character. But nobody, not your teachers, not your leaders, not the institutions that shaped you, ever stopped to ask the most important question of all. Who benefits when you stay loyal? Because here is the truth that powerful people have known for thousands of years. Loyalty is not just a virtue. It is a technology. And like every technology ever invented, it was designed to serve someone. The question is, was that someone you? Let us go back, way back, to the empires that built the ancient world on the backs of devoted men and women who never once questioned why. In ancient Rome, loyalty was not left to chance. It was manufactured. Roman emperors understood that an army that thinks is dangerous, but an army that feels, an army that is emotionally bonded to a symbol, a leader, a cause, that army will march into fire without asking why the fire was lit. So they created rituals. They created oaths. Soldiers swore the sacramentum, a binding military oath not just to the Roman state, but to the emperor personally. Breaking that oath was not just treason, it was spiritual destruction. You were not just a criminal, you were a man without a soul. And that distinction mattered enormously, because it meant the chains were no longer external. They lived inside the soldier, inside his identity, inside his sense of who he was. That is the first hidden truth about loyalty. The most effective loyalty is the kind the subject enforces on himself. Now move forward in time, into the feudal kingdoms of medieval Europe. Lords and kings had the same problem every powerful person has always had. How do you control people who outnumber you? You cannot put a guard behind every peasant. You cannot watch every field and every door. So instead, you build a story. You tell the people that loyalty to their Lord is loyalty to God. That their station in life was divinely assigned, that to rise up, to question, to leave, is not just rebellion, it is sin. The church and the crown became partners in the greatest loyalty operation in human history, and for centuries it worked. Peasants died defending land they would never own, for lords who would never know their names, in wars they had no part in starting. But here is where psychology enters the picture. Modern researchers have a term for what those ancient systems were exploiting. It is called identity fusion, and it is one of the most powerful and dangerous psychological phenomena ever studied. Identity fusion happens when the boundary between your personal identity and a group identity dissolves. When you stop saying, "I belong to this group," and start saying, "This group is who I am." At that point, any threat to the group feels like a threat to your very existence. Any criticism of the leader feels like a personal attack. Any suggestion that you leave feels like someone asking you to die. And this is not weakness. This is not stupidity. This is human neurology, doing exactly what it evolved to do. Our brains are social organs. We are wired for belonging. Tens of thousands of years ago, being cast out from the group meant death. So our nervous systems developed a profound, almost physical need to maintain our place within a community. Powerful systems, Political, religious, corporate, even romantic, have always known how to hijack that need. They give you a uniform, a flag, a title, a belief system. They give you language that only insiders understand. They create enemies outside the group so that the inside feels like the only safe place. They reward displays of loyalty publicly and punish doubt privately. And slowly, quietly, without you ever signing a contract or agreeing to terms, you become fused. Your identity and their agenda become one and the same. And now here is where history becomes deeply personal. Think about the organizations and systems in your own life. Think about the workplace where you gave years of your best energy, defending decisions you privately disagreed with because the company felt like family. Think about the political movement you championed with your whole heart, silencing your own doubts because leaving felt like betrayal. Think about the relationship where you stayed far longer than was healthy, not because you were happy, but because your loyalty had become your identity. Leaving would have meant admitting that the person you had been, devoted, committed, faithful, had been wrong. This is the cage, and it is beautiful. That is why it works. In the 20th century, this phenomenon was studied with terrifying clarity. Psychologist Stanley Milgram conducted his famous obedience experiments in the 1960s. He found that ordinary, decent people would administer what they believed were lethal electric shocks to strangers, simply because an authority figure in a white coat told them to continue. Not because they were cruel, not because they were broken, but because their loyalty to the authority, their sense of obligation to the system they had entered, overrode their own moral instincts. 65% of participants went all the way to the maximum voltage. 65%. Milgram called it the agentic state, the psychological condition in which a person sees themselves not as an individual making choices, but as an instrument of a larger authority. In the agentic state, responsibility feels like it belongs to the person at the top. You are just following the system. You are just being loyal. And this is exactly how atrocities happen, not through monsters. Through devoted, loyal, ordinary people who stopped asking questions. Now let us talk about the antidote, because this is not a video designed to make you cynical. Loyalty itself is not evil. Love is not evil. Devotion is not evil. These are among the most profound capacities human beings possess. The question is never whether to be loyal. The question is always, to what and on what terms? The ancient Stoics understood this. Marcus Aurelius, Emperor of Rome, the most powerful man in the known world, wrote privately in his journals about the obligation of every thinking person to examine their own mind, to never let habit or social pressure replace conscious choice. He wrote about the danger of becoming an actor, playing a role assigned by others, rather than a person living according to reason. He was the emperor. He could have demanded blind loyalty from everyone around him. Instead, he demanded it of no one, and warned himself daily against the corruption of unexamined devotion. Real loyalty, the kind worth having, the kind worth giving, is chosen loyalty. It is loyalty that has looked at the evidence, that has asked the hard questions, that has considered the cost and said, yes, this person, this cause, this community is worthy of my commitment. Not because I was trained to feel this way, not because leaving feels impossible, but because I have thought clearly and I choose to stay. The difference between devotion and design is awareness. And awareness begins with a single uncomfortable question. Why am I loyal to this? Not who told you to be, not what you were taught, not what it would cost you to stop. Why, from the deepest, most honest part of yourself, do you believe this deserves your faithfulness? If you can answer that question clearly, without flinching, without your chest tightening with anxiety at the thought of examining it, then what you have is genuine loyalty. And it is one of the most powerful forces in human life. But if the question makes you afraid, if examining it feels dangerous, if the mere act of asking why feels like a betrayal, then what you may have is not loyalty at all. What you may have is a cage, with your own name engraved on the lock. They hid this from you because a questioning person is harder to lead. A person who chooses their loyalty consciously is less predictable, less controllable, less useful to systems that depend on your devotion without your consent. But you are watching this. You are thinking about this. And that means the cage, if it ever existed, already has a crack in it. The most radical thing you can do in a world built on manufactured loyalty is to think clearly about who and what truly deserves yours, and then choose, freely, fully, on your own terms.